Hello, good afternoon. We're here today with Joel Stern, Chairman and CEO of Stern Stewart and Company. Mr. Stern and his firms are the creator of Economic Value Added, EVA, a financial management system and a tool for the measurement of performance. He's a professor of several business schools, including University of Chicago, Carnegie Mellon, and Columbia. He has written several books and more than 150 articles and papers, including articles for the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. He was previously with Chase Manhattan Bank, heading the global advisory practice. Mr. Stern and his firm have played a leading role helping organizations around the world become value-generated companies. He has directly advised more than 750 organizations around the world, and he's here with us to tell us all about this. Mr. Stern, it's a real pleasure to have you with us today.
It's my first trip to Buenos Aires. It's lovely to be with you.
Welcome. So, Mr. Stern, the very first question is about the nature and what is EVA. Can you tell us in a few words what is EVA, what is its importance, and how would you compare that with other management measures such as return on net asset and, for example, the most common one, return on equity, that is very well known.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, essentially what EVA tries to do is it tries to encompass in one measure the income statement that provides us with earnings, the balance sheet that provides us with assets, but something else that's not included in any other measure of performance, and that is the riskiness of the business that we're looking at. In other words, all businesses have required returns based on their risk. And we believe that if you're going to measure performance in terms of, say, return on equity, you have to compare that return on equity with a measure of the riskiness of the company itself. And EVA does that at the same time of looking at either ROE or ROA, return on equity, return on assets. It says, let's take a look at the total amount of investment and see whether or not the returns being earned are equal to, less than, or more than the required return for risk.
Right. Okay. Yes, of course, it's very clear. Also, we know that the risk that a company takes, it varies across the business cycle of the company. And then the question is, do you see EVA as an applicable tool to growth companies as well as to companies in mature business?
Well, the first companies we worked with were those that were in mature businesses that looked like they had no great future. And then, when they put our EVA system in place, which includes a bonus scheme for all employees, suddenly the performance of a company that looked like it was old and tired looked like it was young and aggressive. Okay, so that was something that was really crucial to me, because one of my classmates is quite famous for recommending high debt ratios and lots of dividend payout in mature companies. And he gave a talk to my clients suggesting that they borrow tons of money they don't need and disgorge lots of dividends out to their shareholders, which is something the companies were not thinking about. But he said that the reason they should do it is because their days are over. And of course their days were not anywhere near over.
Right.
Once they put the EVA management system in place, which includes the bonus scheme, suddenly the employees behaved as if they were in a new, aggressive, rapidly growing company instead of a company that was old and tired.
This is very interesting. So you would say that EVA is a tool that can convert a mature business and even a declining business into a growth business again.
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it can do. And they include companies in industries like the engines that are put into lawnmowers. That's called Briggs & Stratton. Briggs & Stratton was a company that had been, as you would say, old and mature, 90 years old, and they were ready to call it a day. But they hired us and we put our EVA system in place, and it changed the company literally overnight. In less than a year, nobody in the firm recognized the firm. Isn't that something? I mean,
this is
even Mr. Stratton, Frederick Stratton, who came from the original family, he said, My wife doesn't even recognize me.
Wow, this is quite amazing.
It is amazing, right?
And in that sense, obviously, it's not only applicable to business that need to be converted. Right? As a business that, for example, is already on in a high growth period, would you say that it's applicable as well, and it's a tool for generating additional value?
I did not know what the outer limits were.
Right.
But I've worked with more than 800 companies now to implement this, and I can only say to you, we have yet to find a single type of business where it would not be applicable. We've worked with companies in mining, in oil and gas, where they are trying to find new reserves.
Right.
Okay? That's a tough business. We've worked in the banking area.
Right.
Okay? We've worked in construction and construction engineering. We've worked in retail and wholesale, stores and distributors, and you name it, and we've done it. And it's been very exciting for us. Someone once said to us, it would never work in a firm that was a service organization. And I said, okay, maybe they're right. I have no idea. At that time, we had never worked with any.
Well, less capital intensive, so to say, right?
Well, there is no capital, they say. So they said, well, what do we need you for? And I said, I don't know. But then out of the clear blue, Tata Consultancy Services, which is a software and IT company, they hired us, and I said, where's your capital? And they said, we don't have any. I said, why do you want us? Oh, no, you don't understand. We really do have capital. It's working capital.
Right.
It's desks and chairs and things like that. And plus, we train and develop our people. That's real capital too. I said, you're exactly right. Anyway, by the time we were finished, we realized that service organizations were no different from any other organization.
Right. This is very interesting. I was reviewing the other day the IPO of LinkedIn, this technology company, and I was very surprised to see that the company already, like 2 years ago, a year prior to the IPO, was already delivering a return on capital, an ROIC that was well above the 12-13% level. I was very surprised. Right? Then the question is, do you see EVA also as being applied in one of those very highly innovative companies? And within this context, do you see EVA as a driver of innovation within the company?
Well, let's say something. The question is, what alternatives do we have? Okay? Well, number one, we can measure performance with all of the accounting things that you talked about before, like return on equity and return on net assets, and it doesn't involve EVA because it doesn't look at the risk and so forth. But let's assume that's a possibility. Another possibility is we can reward people with shares or share options and things like that, and many companies do. But I discovered to my astonishment that 75% of changes in stock prices are not related to the company's own discretionary performance. In other words, 75% of stock price changes are due to things like changes in interest rates or changes in the exchange rate to the dollar and other such things, and even regulation. The question was, what type of measure is most closely associated with management's discretionary decisions? And number two, can I drive that measure of performance down deep into the organization, even to the shop floor? In other words, so that everybody can be measured, and if everybody can be measured, why don't we put them on a bonus scheme as well?
Right.
Okay, and that's what we discovered. We discovered we could literally drill this down to the bottom, and we can also use it as a measure of performance, and thus as a way to design a bonus scheme. And when we started to do this, we found the performance of companies that were, again, let's go back to what you said before, old and tired.
Right.
Okay? It looked like they were on their last legs. And yet when they put this in place, it changed behaviors like crazy. Okay? And so the question was, is there some magic in this? And there is. You won't believe what the magic is. It's not my measure. It's the quality of the chief executive.
I see. Okay.
Yes, if the chief executive wants to be
fully on board,
a leader,
right,
be innovative, and develop a culture of value,
right,
okay, then this thing will work like a charm.
right.
On the other hand, if CEOs, chief executives, are people who don't have respect for their employees downstairs, we're an elite group up here, and the people downstairs, I don't care about them at all. If that's their attitude, then I say to them, do me a favor, don't do EVA at all, because you're just going to make a mess of my reputation. I don't want to work with companies where the CEO does not have respect for his people.
Very interesting. Talking about leadership, then it brings me to another very interesting issue. EVA and Japan, for example. We noticed that in Japan is a country that had a couple of generations of very innovative CEOs and with very strong leadership, but today seems to be in a new stage of its development, and companies are also a new space. Do you see, have you done many EVA implementations in Japan, for example?
We haven't. We've done some, but let me tell you what I've discovered about Japan.
Right.
The government made gigantic mistakes during the 1980s. There's something in government there called MITI, M-I-T-I,
yes.
and it encouraged companies to over-invest in plant and equipment.
Right.
And for a period now of almost 20 years, Japan has had excess capacity
right.
in its manufacturing. They're only now beginning to get over it.
Right.
So what I would say to you is this: if a government engages in policies that are value destroying,
right,
I cannot help.
Right, of course.
And another example of that, I don't expect any time soon to be called upon by companies in Venezuela.
Right, okay.
The government has put policies in place in which what I would call private contract property rights
right.
don't seem to resonate with the government. Their attitude is, we don't care about private property.
Right.
And if we can simply revoke or abrogate private property contracts, then what's the whole point of having an EVA system? Because, as you may know, under my EVA program, I normally recommend from senior management down to middle management, they don't get their full bonuses that are declared to them in the current year. They get a portion now, and the rest is deposited into a bonus bank that pays out only over time based on sustainability of results. Well, if someone has to take the risk in a country of having deferred income subject to risk, what if the government steps in and says that contract is null and void?
Right.
Well, then the ball game is over. So what I'm saying to you is that if the economic environment, even in Argentina for that matter, if the economic environment is not conducive to having a value-add discussion between management and unions and ordinary employees, and then there's government involved, if some of these players are going to say, okay, we'll do it, and then once they start to do it, they say, no, this is really not for us, what are we going to accomplish? We're going to have very frustrated people there.
Right.
But on the other hand, we have done work in countries where there was tremendous political turmoil, such as Thailand recently, in Zimbabwe.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So you worked in those countries as well.
Yes, but we know how to do it. We know how to engage with the government.
Right.
We assume only one thing: the government would like to get reelected.
Right. Okay.
Okay. If they do, then we want to help them get reelected by having systems in place, not only in the private sector, but the same principles work in state-owned enterprises.
I see. So you have done EVA for state-owned enterprises?
Oh, yes, we have.
Done that. Okay.
Yes, the first one was all the way back in 1995 and 1996. So that's a long time ago.
Right. Yes.
It's almost 20 years, 17 years. That was with the United States Postal Service.
Okay.
And the Postal Service was losing $200 million every month. That's a lot of money.
Yes.
And they had 762,000 employees.
Right.
And the head of the post office said to me, can you fix my problem? I said, Marvin, his name was Marvin Runyon. I said, Marvin, if you will be the champion of the program, I will be your second in command. We will work together to do this. But I need you. In fact, I said, here's my book. Of course, my book did not really appear for about another 6 years. But when the book came out, I must tell you something. I wrote a poem to Marvin Runyon. It was called An Ode to Marvin, and it was in the introduction of my book. And I said to him in the ode, without you, nobody would ever know that the same concept could be applied in government as in the private sector.
Right.
You became the champion of the program, and without a champion at the top, it won't be successful. What you helped me make sure this would be successful.
This is very interesting. Obviously, a public company is also using capital, and they need to deliver a return in excess of the cost of capital. So it's obviously it's an interesting feature. And I was wondering, in relation to implementation of EVA in some of the challenging countries like in Argentina, this country we have an inflation rate which is about 22-25%. How do you implement EVA in a country that has such a high inflation rate?
We have ways to adjust for it. And there are more than one. We actually developed two, and then I think recently a third, because we have been dealing with companies with high inflation. Look at Zimbabwe, for goodness sake. I mean, inflation of 20 or 25% is more like per week. Right? They have 1,000% a year. That's really terrible. The question is, what do you do about it? Well, we have ways of measuring the true underlying economic performance of the company. And as long as you can do it, I don't care what the inflation rate is.
Okay, I understand. I also wanted to ask you about Germany. I have the impression that German companies are less inclined to use capital rationally. Do you share that opinion?
Yes. I do. Yes, and that is the result, unfortunately, of a form of organization that existed until very, very recently that is quite similar to the same problems that were in existence in Japan. In Japan, industrial companies are crowding around and having an intimate relationship with their lender.
That's correct, yes.
And the lender and all of these industrial companies together are called a karetsu. It used to be called many, many years ago a zaibatsu. That was a little bit different, but not much. But in the karetsu, it is in the interest of the bank to make lots and lots and lots of loans. And they will permit companies to have much higher gearing ratios, much higher debt-to-equity ratios than may be healthy for them. Well, the same was true until very recently in Germany. Banks like Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank and others were large equity owners in the companies to whom they were lending money. In other words, they were on both sides of the aisle. Access to capital, right. And so you can misread what you should be doing. In other words, you won't have the same capital discipline that you would have in a system that is closer to the one that I'm familiar with in most of the European countries. By the way, let me tell you where EVA does not work. It does not work in a country where a government is going to stop unfriendly takeovers. The threat of unfriendly takeover is actually a good, positive economic force. Because what it does is it makes sure that people don't go home early. They work hard. They try to do the very best they can. But I remember when the socialist government took over about 15, 20 years ago in France, we were soliciting companies in France. We had already done this work for Lafarge. Lafarge was on EVA at the cement company. They're the largest cement company in the world. But we went to visit other companies, and they were quite keen to work with us. And then Mitterrand won as president of France, and he said to the industrial companies, "Don't worry, I won't let any unfriendly takeovers take place anymore." And once that happened, we suddenly received telephone calls from companies that we had visited who said, "Listen, we don't need EVA, because EVA is used to maximize your performance. We don't have to maximize our performance. We have the president of France protecting us."
Excellent. Just, we are approaching the end of the interview. Wanted to ask you a little bit about Latin America. The other day I was reviewing the Peruvian market, which has a very small capital markets, but a number of companies are publicly traded there. And I was very surprised to see that most of the companies were delivering very high returns on capital. Have you implemented many EVA cases in Latin America?
Yes, we have.
You have, I see.
Where did we start? Well, we started in Mexico. And the reason we started there was because I did my graduate study at the University of Chicago. And I discovered, to my pleasant surprise, that the chief financial officer of Pemex, the state-owned oil company, had earned his PhD at the University of Chicago in economics. So we had an exchange, first in letters, and then he was in New York, he visited with us, and he said, "I'd like to talk about EVA and how you can help us." Pemex was the first company in Mexico to work with us. He then left Pemex and he went to work for the big beer company, which is called Modelo. And he called us and said, "I'm now here. Your next stop in Mexico is to come and visit my management team." We presented to the management team. Next thing we knew,
I see.
EVA in the beer business there. But he was fortunate because we had done a lot of work in the beer business around the world. In Brazil,
Right.
The Brazilian Brahma,
Right.
they're on EVA. It was called Ambev.
Right.
Then they became InBev, and they became something else. They're now one of the largest beer companies in the world, and they're still with EVA. Okay?
Also, right. Also with it.
Also, we do a lot of work in the Caribbean.
I see. Okay.
In Trinidad, in other of the countries there, we've been very, very successful. Also, we have a separate office from New York in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and we have a team of 10 people there, and they've been working with companies for 20 years.
Okay.
Now, of course, one of the reasons that we've been successful in Brazil is that the year we opened the office, there was a major financial crisis in Brazil, and it looked like EVA was going to be dead for at least a while.
Right.
And the people who are running our business, who had been hired and all of this, they contacted me and said, "What are you going to do?" I said, it's a discussion point at our partner meeting, and I'll contact you as soon as the partner meeting is over. He said, "It's either thumbs up or thumbs down, isn't it?"
Right.
I said, "Yes, that's what we're going to talk about." And many of my partners wanted to shut it down. They said it's going to lose money for years.
Well,
Okay.
but there's a huge opportunity ahead.
Yes, but then we can make that opportunity 3 years from now. That was the argument. The argument was, listen, we got 10 people in the office. It's going to cost us $2 million.
Right.
I'm not joking. It's going to cost, with all expenses included,
Right.
it's going to cost us $2 million a year. What do we need the headache for? And I looked up and I said, because my name is on the door,
Right.
I will not permit it. These young people who are working with us, they had nothing to do with the financial crisis. We'll give them some research topics to work on. They'll work on other assignments from other parts of the world, and we'll do the best we can. That's my decision. I make final choices. I'm the CEO. That's my decision. And it was the best decision I ever made about Brazil, because the man who runs it now was still the man who was running it then. And he has not left me. He's done a very good job. We are very successful in Brazil.
Excellent.
Thank goodness, yes.
Okay.
And we're about to start, by the way, in Guatemala. I'm very
I see.
excited about that, too.
Well, congratulations. Very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much for having me.
Joel, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure and a real honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.